Tonight, your body may be tired, but your mind is still standing guard. You turned off the lights. You got through the day. You did what you could. And yet here you are, still carrying conversations that already ended, problems that still have no answer, responsibilities that feel larger at night than they did this afternoon. Your room is quiet, but your thoughts are not. One part of you wants sleep, and another part of you is still trying to fix tomorrow before tonight is even over. And maybe that is the question hiding underneath all of this. What if the reason your mind won't fully settle is not just because you have a lot going on? What if part of what you're carrying tonight was never actually yours to carry in the first place? Not imaginary, not unimportant, not small, but not yours. That possibility changes everything, because most people do not lie awake at night only because life is hard. Sometimes they lie awake because they have quietly taken hold of things no human soul was designed to hold for hours on end. The future of people they love. The outcome of decisions they cannot control. The emotional weight of someone else's choices. The pressure to keep everything from falling apart. The unspoken belief that if they stop thinking about it, even for a few hours, something bad will happen. So tonight, I want to sit with that question for a while. What exactly did you bring into bed with you? Not just your tired body, not just your thoughts, but your invisible load. Maybe you brought in a conversation you keep replaying, wondering if you said the wrong thing. Maybe you brought in worry about money, about work, about your children, your marriage, your health, or the future you cannot yet see. Maybe you brought in somebody else's disappointment. Maybe you brought in the pressure to have an answer you do not have yet. Maybe you brought in the quiet feeling that too much depends on you and that rest would be irresponsible. If that feels familiar, there is something in Scripture that speaks gently and directly to this kind of night. Not with a lecture, not with shame, but with honesty. Because the Bible knows what it means to be human. It knows what it means to be stretched thin, afraid, responsible, uncertain, and exhausted. It knows what it means to carry more than you should, and it also knows the difference between faithfulness and overload. And one of the clearest examples comes from someone we usually think of as strong enough to handle almost anything. Moses. When most people think about Moses, they think about the burning bush, Pharaoh, the Red Sea, the commandments. They think about courage, leadership, and calling. But there is another scene in Exodus 18 that feels much closer to what many people experience internally at the end of the day. Moses is trying to lead the people, judge disputes, answer questions, settle problems, and hold the entire community together. From morning until evening, people stand around him waiting for direction. He is carrying the concerns of everybody. He is the one they come to. He is the one they expect to sort things out. He is sitting at the center of endless need. And then his father-in-law Jethro watches this and says something that almost sounds shocking in its simplicity. He tells Moses, in essence, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people will wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone." That is such a human moment, because Moses was not carrying nonsense. He was carrying real needs, real people, real problems, important things. And yet the issue was not whether the needs were real. The issue was that he was holding them in a way that would slowly crush him. That matters tonight, because some of what you are carrying may be real, serious, and important, and still be too heavy to hold the way you are holding it. There are people who have made a life out of becoming emotional Moses for everyone around them. The one who has to keep the peace, the one who has to anticipate every crisis, the one who has to make sure everybody is okay. The one who feels responsible for everybody's mood, everybody's future, everybody's outcome. And during the day, that role can almost feel noble, needed, even loving. But at night, the cost becomes visible. At night, when there is no task left to distract you, your soul starts to feel the strain of carrying too much for too long. Maybe you have not been trying to control everything because you are proud. Maybe you have been trying to control everything because you care. Maybe that is what makes this so difficult. You are not restless because you are cold-hearted. You are restless because you love deeply, and you do not know how to love without also trying to hold. But love and carrying are not always the same thing. That is one of the hardest truths for the restless mind. You can care about someone without being able to carry their whole story. You can love someone without being able to control their choices. You can be responsible for your part without being responsible for the entire outcome. And that distinction sounds simple when you hear it in the daytime. It feels much harder when you are lying in the dark with your thoughts. Because your mind has its own logic at night. It says, if I keep thinking, maybe I can prevent pain. If I keep worrying, maybe I am still doing something useful. If I stay mentally involved, maybe I'm protecting what matters. But Scripture keeps inviting us to a different kind of wisdom. Not passive, not careless, but clearer. There is something you may need to hear right here. Thinking about a problem all night is not the same as carrying it wisely. Sometimes it is just carrying it alone. And if restless nights have become part of your routine, I've left something in the description that may be worth looking at after this video. If it helps, it can also be a quiet way to support this channel. Now, before we go any further, it may help to notice that not all burdens are the same. Some burdens belong to today, some belong to tomorrow, some belong to other people, and some belong only to God. A lot of mental exhaustion comes from mixing those categories together until everything feels equally urgent. Something needs your attention tomorrow, so your mind treats it like it needs your attention right now. Somebody you love is struggling, so your heart treats that struggle like it is yours to solve. A conversation is unfinished, so your imagination starts finishing it in 12 different ways before morning. You do not know what is coming next, so your thoughts start trying to build a bridge to every possible future all at once. And by the time the night is halfway over, you are carrying today, tomorrow, everyone else, and 100 possible outcomes that do not even exist yet. No wonder peace feels far away. Jesus speaks into this in a way that feels especially tender for people who live in their minds at night. In Matthew 6, he says, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." That verse is often quoted quickly, almost like a slogan, but there is deep wisdom in it. Jesus is not saying tomorrow will have no problems. He is saying tomorrow has its own place, its own time, its own grace. And one reason your soul feels heavy tonight may be that you are pulling tomorrow's trouble into a night that was not built to hold it. Think about that. The mind often tries to do advanced suffering, advanced problem solving, advanced fear, advanced grief. It starts living in scenes that have not happened, conversations that have not occurred, losses that are not here, failures that may never arrive. It tells itself this is preparation. Sometimes it is really just exhaustion in disguise. And Jesus, with remarkable simplicity, draws a line. Tomorrow exists, but you do not have to bring all of it into bed tonight. This does not mean ignore reality. It means know the difference between what can be faced tomorrow and what must be held now. There is a kind of pressure that says, if I do not mentally rehearse every scenario, I will not be ready. But that pressure often leaves you less ready, not more. Tired, frayed, spiritually thin, emotionally scattered. And maybe that is why Jesus talks so much about daily bread, daily mercy, daily trust. Not because life is always simple, but because human beings were not designed to carry time in giant emotional chunks. We were given this moment, this breath, this night. There is freedom in that, even if only a little at first. You may not be able to solve your whole future tonight, but you may be able to stop asking yourself to do that. You may not be able to guarantee a good outcome for the people you love, but you may be able to release the false assignment of being their savior. You may not be able to make uncertainty disappear, but you may be able to notice when uncertainty has turned into a burden you were never meant to drag through the night. And this is where another story becomes so powerful. In Mark chapter 4, Jesus and his disciples are in a boat. A storm rises. The waves are real. The wind is violent. The danger is not imagined. The disciples are terrified, and Jesus is asleep. That detail has unsettled people for centuries because it feels almost unbelievable. How does someone sleep in a storm? The answer is not that storms are pleasant. The answer is not that Jesus does not care. The disciples wake him and say, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" That question is worth pausing over because it sounds a lot like what fear whispers in the middle of a restless night. If I feel this much distress, does God see it? If the storm is real, does his quiet mean distance? If I do not have peace right now, does that mean I am alone? But the story shows something deeply important. Jesus being asleep did not mean he was absent. It meant the storm was not carrying the same authority inside him that it was carrying inside the disciples. That is a very different thing. The storm was outside the boat, but it had also entered the disciples internally. Their fear had begun carrying what the storm was threatening to do. Jesus was physically in the same environment, but spiritually anchored somewhere deeper. That is the invitation, not the comparison. Not, why can't you be like Jesus already? But, what would it look like to let his presence teach your inner world how to rest, even before everything outside becomes calm? Because sometimes what keeps you awake is not only the existence of a storm. It is that the storm has convinced you that unless you stay mentally on high alert, everything will collapse. And there is another layer to this. The disciples woke Jesus because they believed they were alone in managing the danger. Fear often grows in the place where responsibility and isolation meet. When you feel responsible and alone, your mind starts running faster. It begins scanning, planning, anticipating, and tightening. It cannot relax because it believes no one else is holding anything. But one of the quietest gifts of faith is this: you are not the only one awake over what concerns you. God does not ask you to become unconscious to your life. He invites you to remember that his care does not stop when your strength does. That is why 1 Peter 5:7 says, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." That verse is often comforting, but it is also practical. Cast, that means release, transfer, hand over. You cannot cast something you are not aware you are holding. So maybe one of the most honest things you can do tonight is simply ask, what am I holding right now? Maybe it is the need to fix someone else's mood. Maybe it is the fear that one wrong move will ruin everything. Maybe it is regret from something you said earlier. Maybe it is the pressure to have your life figured out by now. Maybe it is grief. Maybe it is the future of your family. Maybe it is a decision you keep forcing yourself to resolve before dawn, even though clarity is not coming tonight. And sometimes the answer is even more subtle. Maybe what you are holding is an identity. The identity of being the strong one, the dependable one, the one who does not fall apart, the one who keeps everyone else steady, the one who cannot rest because too much depends on them. That identity can feel meaningful for a long time, until you realize it has become a burden. It has trained you to believe that surrender is failure and rest is weakness. It has taught you to stay braced, even in prayer. But the scriptures do not describe rest as weakness. They often describe it as trust, not perfect trust, not effortless trust, but real trust. And trust is not proven by how tightly you hold everything. Sometimes it is revealed by what you are finally willing to place in God's hands. There is a small psalm that carries a surprising amount of peace in just a few lines. Psalm 131 says, "I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child with its mother." That is such a beautiful image because it does not describe a soul that has solved everything. It describes a soul that has stopped demanding immediate satisfaction from every fear and every question. A weaned child is no longer frantic for instant filling. There is a settledness, a resting, a nearness. David is not saying, "I understand everything." He is saying, "My soul has learned another posture." And maybe that is what this night is about. Not figuring everything out. Learning another posture. A posture where the soul loosens its grip. A posture where silence is no longer an enemy. A posture where not having the answer tonight does not mean being abandoned. A posture where care remains, but strain begins to leave. If these quiet moments help you end your day with a little more peace, you're welcome to subscribe and spend more nights here with us. And if you want, you can also leave a comment later with one thing you're learning to release. Sometimes naming it is the beginning of laying it down. There is another reason this kind of burden is so hard to release. Many people have unconsciously linked worry with love. If I stop worrying, it feels like I stopped caring. If I stop replaying the situation, it feels like I abandoned it. If I go to sleep, it feels like I'm leaving the people I love unprotected. That connection runs deep in a lot of hearts. But worry is not the purest form of love. Love can pray. Love can act when action is possible. Love can show up. Love can listen. Love can speak truth. Love can carry responsibility where responsibility is appropriate. But worry often steps across the line from love into attempted control. It tries to do emotionally what only God, time, truth, or another person's own choices can do in reality. And once that happens, the burden gets heavier because you are now trying to produce outcomes with mental effort alone. No wonder you feel tired. This is where it may help to be very honest about a few categories. There are things you can do something about tomorrow. Those deserve clarity, not midnight panic. There are things you cannot do anything about until more information comes. Those deserve patience, not endless rehearsal. There are things that belong to another person's obedience, another person's healing, another person's maturity. Those deserve compassion, not ownership. And there are things so far beyond human reach that they belong only to God. Those deserve surrender. The restless mind tends to flatten all of that into one single feeling. I must keep holding this. But you do not have to keep holding everything just because it matters. This is part of what Jesus meant when he said, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Heavy laden, loaded down, carrying weight. That invitation is not only for the obviously broken, it is also for the inwardly overburdened. For the person who still functions, still works, still smiles, still helps, but privately feels bowed under the constant internal load. Jesus does not say, "Come to me once you have become light." He says, "Come as you are carrying." Rest is not a reward for people who had easy days. It is an invitation for people who are weary. So maybe tonight the question is not, how do I become a person who never feels burdened? Maybe the better question is, what does it look like to bring my burden to the right place? That changes the atmosphere immediately, because now you are no longer trying to manufacture peace out of your own thoughts. You are responding to an invitation. Sometimes people think surrender means pretending something does not hurt. But biblical surrender is more honest than that. It says, this does hurt. This does matter. This is beyond me tonight. And I am choosing not to sit on the throne of this problem as if everything depends on my mind staying awake. That is not denial. That is humility. And humility often feels like relief. Maybe you need that relief tonight. Maybe you need permission to admit that you are carrying not only your own concerns, but also the imagined responsibility for things God never assigned to you. The outcome of every relationship, the emotional stability of every person you love, the guarantee that nothing difficult will happen, the requirement to know exactly what comes next, the obligation to tie up every loose end before sleep. Those are crushing assignments for a human heart. And perhaps one reason peace has felt so far away is that peace cannot live easily in a heart that is trying to be God. Not because you intended to replace him, but because fear sometimes slowly pushes us into roles we were never meant to occupy. The good news is that you do not have to keep that role. You can step down from it. Not from responsibility, but from false responsibility. Not from caring, but from control. Not from love, but from the belief that your constant inner strain is what keeps the world from breaking. It isn't. There are mercies at work in your life and in the lives of those you love that do not depend on your mind continuing to spin tonight. And if the nights have been especially difficult lately, there's also something in the description you may want to explore when this video ends. If it turns out to be helpful, it's also a simple way to support the work we do here. Now imagine this with me for a moment. Imagine placing what you are carrying into separate hands. This concern about tomorrow's work belongs in tomorrow's hands. This regret from earlier belongs in God's mercy, and, if needed, tomorrow's conversation. This fear for someone I love belongs in prayer, not in my chest all night. This unanswered question belongs in the waiting I do not prefer, but may still be called to endure. This future I cannot see belongs in the hands of the one who already sees further than I can. That kind of naming can begin to untangle the knot, because many people do not need more mental effort at night. They need spiritual sorting. What belongs with me right now? What belongs later? What belongs elsewhere? What belongs with God? The more honestly you answer those questions, the more you may notice that a surprising amount of your exhaustion is coming not from your life alone, but from your way of holding your life. And that is why the title matters so much. You may be carrying something into bed that was never yours to carry, not because it is unreal, but because concern became possession, because compassion became ownership, because responsibility expanded into control, because love got tangled up with pressure, because your soul, over time, forgot the difference between being faithful and being overburdened. This happens quietly. It happens in good people. It happens in devoted people. It happens in people who want to do right by everyone. It happens in people who do not know how to turn off the sense that they must stay alert. But tonight, perhaps you are being invited back to a simpler truth. You are human. You are loved. You are not alone. And you are not required to carry every weight that presents itself to your mind. You may still have problems in the morning. Moses still had leadership to do. The disciples still had storms to face. David still lived with uncertainty. Jesus never promised a life without concern. But Scripture keeps showing us that peace does not wait until everything is explained. Peace begins when the burden is placed where it belongs. So if your mind is still reaching for one more thing to solve tonight, maybe let this be the interruption. You do not have to solve tomorrow in order to be allowed to rest tonight. You do not have to rehearse every possible outcome to prove that you care. You do not have to carry another person's entire future in your chest. You do not have to stay awake as an act of faithfulness. You can be faithful and still sleep. You can care and still release. You can love and still let go. You can trust God with what matters without pretending it does not matter. And maybe that is the deeper peace the restless mind has been missing. Not the peace of having no burdens at all, but the peace of finally realizing which burdens were never yours. Before this day fully ends, you might want to quietly name one thing you've been carrying that does not belong in your hands tonight. No performance, no dramatic moment, just honesty. A simple inward prayer. Lord, this matters to me, but I cannot carry it like this anymore. That is enough to begin. Sometimes peace does not arrive as a sudden feeling. Sometimes it begins as a decision to stop gripping, a decision to stop serving as the guardian of things outside your reach, a decision to believe that God remains God while you sleep. That thought alone has helped many weary hearts. God remains God while you sleep. He is not confused by what confuses you. He is not rushed by what rushes you. He is not frightened by what frightens you. He is not weakened by the limits that make you feel so small tonight. And because of that, you are free to become small in the best sense. Not insignificant, not forgotten, just human again. No longer pretending to be able to hold more than you can hold. There is rest in becoming human again before God. There is rest in admitting, this is too heavy for me. There is rest in hearing Jethro's wisdom to Moses echo across the centuries. This is too much for you to carry alone. There is rest in hearing Jesus say that tomorrow has its own place. There is rest in seeing him asleep in the storm, not because storms are unreal, but because the Father's care is deeper still. There is rest in Peter's instruction to cast what weighs you down onto the God who cares for you. And there is rest in knowing that the night does not demand that you become your own source of safety. So whatever this day has placed on your shoulders, and whatever your own thoughts have piled on top of it, perhaps this is something you needed to remember tonight. You are carrying less faithfully when you carry everything alone. Some of what you brought into this room can stay with God. Some of what followed you into bed can be left at His feet. Some of what has been pressing against your chest all evening was never yours to guard, to solve, or to sustain. And if that is true, then maybe you can breathe a little differently now. Maybe your jaw can unclench. Maybe your thoughts do not have to keep running at full speed. Maybe the room can feel like a room again, not a command center. Maybe this night can become what it was meant to be. Not a courtroom where every thought argues its case. Not a workshop where every problem must be fixed. But a place of rest. A place where your body is allowed to be tired. A place where your soul is allowed to stop performing. A place where trust can quietly do its work in the dark. If all you do tonight is recognize one burden you were never meant to keep carrying, that is not a small thing. That is a holy kind of clarity. And sometimes clarity is the doorway to peace. So let that truth stay with you now. What is yours for tomorrow can wait until tomorrow. What belongs to someone else can remain with them. What belongs only to God can be returned to God. And what remains in your hands tonight may be smaller, lighter, and more manageable than what you first felt when you lay down. Not because life changed in the last few minutes, but because perspective did. And sometimes perspective is enough to soften the night. May you be given that softness now. May your mind loosen where it has been gripping. May your heart be reminded that care does not require control. May your soul find the quiet courage to release what was never yours. And may the God who watches without growing weary hold what you no longer can. Tonight you do not have to carry it all. Tonight, you are allowed to rest.